Today I learned all different kind of things. I don't have the time or ability to share them all, unfortunately. I'll just say what's on my mind. And point one I'll start with is that I don't have to make daily videos if I don't want to, obviously. All this is going to be really obvious. I didn't even grab the DSLR. Although I love the double camera format. It's so much fun. I'm really happy with the products I'm getting out of these dual camera videos. But it just wasn't meant to be for this video, and that's okay. I didn't even have to make this video, but I want to because it makes me happy. And so that's one. Let's go to two. Um, I talked about watching gun safety videos, which I've done in the past. I've even produced a couple gun safety videos in response to unique things that have happened in my experience, which I'll go ahead and talk about right now. Full disclosure, and it's important that I can model for other people responsible behavior and responsible communication. And part of that is acknowledging my imperfections and mistakes and sharing them with the hopes that others could learn from those mistakes. And so this might get a bit drawn out, but you'll understand why it's important to me and why I'm bringing it up again after approximately 6 years since I made the original video about drop safety. And so I'm going to talk about my experience making gun safety videos first, and then I'm going to go into my thoughts and responses based on the collection of gun safety videos I watched last night, and perhaps outline some future video or video series, ideally paired with educational content such as study guides and tests, which one can complete after watching the video to verify and reinforce their knowledge of gun safety. And so to start, I've had multiple negligent discharges in my life. The first one was when I was a kid, and I was operating a rifle with a transparent magazine. And you can easily get yourself into trouble doing that, because I looked at the magazine and assumed that I had expended all of the ammunition. And so I took the magazine out. I don't remember exactly what happened. It was a long time ago. But basically, I made two big fundamental errors and violations of gun safety. First one was assuming that the gun was unloaded and treating it as such, almost. And you'll see how I barely avoided injury when I finish the story. But the second mistake, was, not. I didn't want to put the gun away with the hammer back. I wanted to let the hammer forwards before putting the gun away. And so I did not adequately clear the firearm before letting the hammer forwards, and I simply pointed it at the ground about an inch away from my foot and pulled the trigger, assuming it was empty, and it wasn't, and I almost shot my foot as a kid because of those compounding mistakes, assuming that this transparent magazine was actually showing me that the gun was empty, which it wasn't. And I took the magazine out without looking at it, and there was at least one round in the chamber. And I don't know if I took I might not have even taken the magazine out, but I think I did. I think I took the magazine out, pointed the gun at the ground, pulled the trigger, and it fired. And I almost shot my foot. And that, it was a mistake. I wasn't I was making assumptions, and I was probably also responding to a bit of social nervousness. Like, we were done shooting, and I was probably responding to some pressure to clean up rapidly. I was focused more on putting the gun away than safely handling the gun. And that's what contributed to the negligent discharge, which thankfully nobody was hurt. And so now into the second negligent discharge story. And this one is very compounding series of phenomenons. But it's super, super important, and I'm going to take a couple angles. First one is a rule that is rarely covered about safe gun handling, and that is... Give me a second here. Okay, the rule is to not place a gun in a precarious situation where it might fall over. All right, I need a second. I need to organize my thoughts before I go on. Okay, I remember where I was going with this video. Okay, so this is super important. Whenever you set a gun down, whether it's on a table, resting against a wall, whatever, it is paramount that in the case of vibrations, or if the gun is accidentally pushed or bumped or whatever, that the gun is not readily about to fall over uncontrollably. Not only can this damage the gun, can this damage the things around the gun, but it can cause certain firearms to discharge without touching the trigger. Not all guns are drop safe. And you should never assume or rely on the mechanical drop safety, even if it is present. And so I will tell the nuance of the story. I had gotten home and I set my concealed carry pistol, which, it happened to be a Polish P83. And there's other guns that are known to do this. The CZ, the 380 9x18 CZ pistol also does this, where if a series of conditions are in place, if the safety is off, the hammer is down, and a round is in the chamber, and you drop the gun and the hammer of the gun hits the ground, what will happen is the slide will go backwards with inertia. The hammer and frame of the gun will stop, and the slide of the gun, and these are fixed barrel guns, so the barrel is fixed to the frame. It's not a tilting barrel. What happens is the slide goes backwards with enough force that the hammer hits the ground and stops moving, and the slide continues moving backwards slightly because it's in half cock. So the slide is able to move a fraction of an inch back, and the extractor claw is holding on to the cartridge casing. And this causes the firing pin to be struck with enough force to ignite the round, causing the gun to discharge in an upwards direction. And this design flaw, as well as, the human error of dropping guns, which should be understood. let me tell you, if you're going to become a gun owner, I promise you, unless if you're some kind of perfect person, which you aren't, you're going to drop your guns. So it's really important that guns actually are engineered with drop safeties in mind, and that they are carried correctly, like the way they're designed to be. But fundamentally, that's kind of what happened, but in a more complicated sense. Because what happened is actually the gun discharged when I wasn't in the room. I had set the gun in a seemingly safe place on a desk, but at a very, very slight angle. That would have never been a problem, except that I was also playing loud music, and the loud music created a vibration, which the vibrating music and the slight angle of the desk area where I had set the gun created an effect where it was just a clock. It was just a countdown. And every time the song looped, I played a song on loop and walked out of the room into the kitchen, and the gun was slowly fell off the table desk and fired into the ceiling. And it happened when I wasn't even in the room. And so I was in the kitchen. I heard the gun go off. I went into the room. I smelled the gunpowder, and I didn't even know which one of the guns had fired, because I had multiple guns in the room. And it took me a while of searching, and even longer, to really figure out exactly how that happened. And eventually, I made 2 different videos about it on my first channel, which is, to be fair, an extremely offensive channel. But I own up to my mistakes. I'm not going to deny that I've made mistakes in the past. And I'm not going to delete the channel because it has very important videos like that gun safety video. And I can't even access the channel even if I wanted to delete it, but I don't want it deleted because I think that owning up to your mistakes and showing personal growth is important. But fundamentally, we're going to go right back to the important rule, which is never to leave a gun in a place where it can easily be knocked over. Never leave a gun in a precarious situation. And also, the other angle is the angle of gun designers. If you are designing a gun, do your due diligence to ensure that that gun has drop safety features built in, like firing pin block. Because the end user is probably going to be dropping the gun. So that's my experience with gun safety and my mistakes and me owning up to them, and kind of as well, not just as some sort of like this is not about me, it's about safety and human health and well-being, and respect for the purpose of firearms, which is to defend people, which is to protect life, safety, and well-being. And part of that, in order to achieve that function with the firearm, requires safe handling, operation, storage of firearms. And so with all that said, I'm going to conclude the video with I might think of some other stuff at the end, but the other point I wanted to get to in this video was kind of my initial responses to my initial thoughts, feelings, and takeaways from watching a whole bunch of different gun safety videos. Examples are like, I don't remember the specific institutions, but government-funded videos from California, Texas, private institutions like the NRA and the NSSF, as well as content creators. I watched a gun safety video by Warrior Poet Society, for example, and a few others. I don't recall all the videos I watched through. But this is kind of going to be my initial outlining and takeaway of my feelings about gun safety. And there's a lot of nuance to gun safety. And so, are we talking about gun safety and how we store the guns, how we transport the guns, or how we handle the guns when we're shooting them? And also how we handle the guns when we're carrying them for self-defense. And so there's going to be different rules for different situations, as well as for different people. The way you handle a gun in a shooting competition is going to be different than the way you handle the gun when you're just shooting for fun at the range in a non-competitive environment. And even those subtle differences are going to affect safe handling. As well as if you're hunting or cleaning, maintaining, disassembling, reassembling your firearm, loading, unloading, holstering, unholstering, as well as gun handling in non-shooting environments, such as when you're buying, selling a gun, how to safely handle it, and knowing your environment. Are you shooting by yourself? Are you shooting with experienced shooters, or are you shooting with new shooters? And also your individual circumstances, your home environment, your family, are there children, even your financial situation, needs, all of this needs to play into effect. Can you afford a gun safe? What, how much time, your personal dedication to, and it requires a high level of self-reflection to say, like, how capable am I? You have to be honest with yourself about your limits, your psychological state, your nutrition. Are you tired? All of these things can become confounding factors in terms of safe or unsafe gun handling. I don't want to get too off, but I do want to address some important point that if you're an outsider coming into this, it's going to be challenging. It's going to be almost seemingly frustrating and contradictory. And it honestly, like, from the insider perspective, it's important to be aware that the perceived inconsistencies in gun safety training might be off-putting to a new person. It's overwhelming. They might not be able to put it into accurate context, or it's potentially insufficient safety training, perhaps giving them a false sense of security. Like, oh, I watched that one gun video that was like 5 minutes long that counted 3 rules. And the reason that video exists is because it's better that you know the 3 rules than you know the 10 rules, because maybe you're not dedicated enough to learn all 10 rules, and all 10 rules might not always apply to you. But the 3 rules, and so that's why people try to boil it down to extreme fundamentals. Things like pointing the gun in a safe direction and keeping your finger off the trigger, you're almost always going to hear. But even I think it's a noteworthy divide whether we're going to talk about the 4th rule, which is usually know your target and what's beyond it. And when I talk about this 4th rule, I expand it greater to knowing, it's demanding, it's almost impossible, but knowing total situational awareness. Because look, you can know what's your target, you can have a safe backstop, but if your friend is behind you and they're running and they're about to run across your line of fire, but you're tunnel visioned at the target and you don't see them in your periphery, you might start shooting when they're over the line of fire. if you're not paying attention not only to what's downrange, but to what's left, right, behind you, let alone, other dynamics, if you include verticality into your shooting situation, which that does happen. This is a 3D world, and things change too. So just because somebody hasn't crossed the line of fire yet, if you can tell that they're walking in a way that they're about to cross the line of fire, then don't take your finger off the trigger and don't shoot, because you can reasonably conclude that they're about to walk across the firing line. So situational awareness is incredibly important. Motor control is incredibly important. You need to be physically capable of doing these tasks, which are complex, and you're going to be multitasking. You're going to have to pay attention to your trigger. You're going to have to pay attention to where your gun is pointed, and you're going to have to pay attention to all of the people around you. And so it is a heavy responsibility, and it shouldn't be overwhelming. There has to be a way to bring new people into it, especially young people. Like, that's why there's the stop, don't touch, leave the area, tell an adult. And that doesn't just apply to children. That applies to anyone who is not competent with a firearm. And you can replace adult with competent individual, because there's a lot of adults who, are not going to handle the gun appropriately. So, but we can't even, and you can't train a child like that. You can't say, kid, don't just tell any adult, only tell the responsible adults, because children aren't going to be, you can't impose that level of discernment on a child, But unfortunately, or fortunately, this is just the way it is. You have to impose that level of discernment on other adults. That if you don't feel comfortable with a gun, you have to find someone who is competent with a firearm to manage that firearm safely. And if you want to be there, you have to put in the time and effort and lifelong commitment to gun safety. It's never over. We can go back to this meme that I've been playing with. Like, it's every day. It's gun safety is every day. So I think I don't want to be like super dark or whatever, but like, you don't want to be, you don't want to have that on your conscience, that somebody got hurt or killed because you weren't paying attention. And it applies to more than just guns. It applies to motor vehicles, any kind of dangerous activity, food preparation, all kinds of things that we participate in our daily lives that are responsibilities for the safety and well-being of ourselves and others. It's on us to educate ourselves in our advancement of social and personal responsibility and accountability. And I just want to really emphasize that point, because the reason I'm dragging this out so long is a result of my passion for these things, my passion for humanity and goodness. And, in particular for me personally, I enjoy firearms. My enjoyment of firearms has changed a lot throughout my life. The way I enjoy firearms now is vastly different than the way I enjoyed firearms in the past. And I think it's for the better, because I've just pushed myself to a further and further state of self-awareness to be like, the things I enjoy about firearms now is like the subtlety. I love the physical stimulations, the sound, the recoil. Um, it's very biologically pleasing, and I get almost the same amount of pleasure just using like airsoft guns, as opposed to actual firearms, which are still more enjoyable. I mean, it's definitely proportional. The bigger and badder the gun is, the more I'm going to enjoy operating it, you know. Um, Even in spite of the pain, like, if, like, you would catch me at the range running a 454 Casull all day. I would love it. I mean, I love shooting my pistol grip only 17-inch 300 Winchester Magnum one-handedly, because it's fun. It, is it painful to shoot? Yes, but the psychological enjoyment as well as the physiological enjoyment from the intense stimulation, I enjoy. I like it. It's a pleasurable pain for me, and I understand that a lot of people would have a hard time relating to that. That's why most people don't have pistol grip only bolt action 300 Winchester Magnum rifles with 17-inch barrels. Um, but that's neither here nor there. Video is not supposed to be about me. It's supposed to be informing people about firearm safety. And definitely when you're getting into those powerful guns, it's a different level of safety because you can injure yourself. If somebody wasn't trained in firearms and they just picked up, one of my extremely powerful, high recoiling firearms, they could easily severely injure themselves. You could break your wrist, you can break your shoulder, you can break your face, you can accidentally shoot yourself by double firing. And so, if you are interested or desiring to operate such high powered weapons, it's highly advisable that you work your way up to it, starting with smaller guns and learning the techniques and working your way up in power and in experience. This is going to make it, more fun and give you better results as far as if you're actually trying to hit what you're shooting at, let alone if you're considering the defensive applications, like you want dangerous game defense, you want a high-powered gun to protect you from bears in the woods. If you want it to be more than just a comfort object, which, by the way, is totally valid, as long as you're doing it safely, because guns are primarily comfort objects. And that's just an observation. It shouldn't be taken negatively or positively, and it requires a high level of responsibility to acknowledge that the guns are comfort objects. That just because you have a 500 Smith & Wesson on your hip, you might still get eaten by the bear, And let me tell you, carrying that 500 on your hip is going to do things to your lower back that you're not going to like. Okay? And so that's a whole other part of gun safety and responsibility, is understanding the long-term effects, which are not talked about too often, but they definitely do occur. If you start studying, you'll learn that police officers and people who carry guns as part of their job for an extended period of time do suffer injuries and lifelong pain as a result of those life decisions, as a result of their career choices. And so that shouldn't be taken lightly. And self-care, and as well as any repeated activity can over time develop muscle imbalances, which can result in pain and injury. So it's important to exercise your body balanced and in totality. And I haven't even brushed on the consulting the experts thing, because I came into this final third portion of the video as much as like an observation and, subtle criticism of the inconsistencies in gun safety training. And while those criticisms are, understandable, ultimately we have to embrace the imperfect and dynamic nature of things. We can't, even if we wanted to, we couldn't just push a button and delete all the guns. So the guns are out there, and in spite of the, commendable efforts of many, many people to create gun educational content and to teach others and share the content, that's noteworthy, and that shouldn't be ignored, and it's righteous. Just because it's not perfect, just because it's contradictory, that's, I wouldn't even necessarily want to go so far as to say it's contradictory, but it might appear contradictory if you're incapable of contextualizing the information. And so ultimately, I think that's really what I wanted to say. I think I got all of my points out. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I didn't mention that I wanted to mention. It almost seems like a saturated market. Like, it can be a bit demoralizing. It almost makes me question, like, why would I spend my time recreating the wheel? Why, did I write my own list of gun rules, which I do have. I'm not even reading them right now. I didn't even bring them with me, but even if, because this video isn't me reading my list of gun rules, that I've devised, and there's a lot of them, and they are built on those initial 4 that you'll learn about. And okay, so here's the contradiction. I'm glad I gave myself this time, because I'm going to go into the details, because this matters. There's the 3 gun rules, which are: point the gun in a safe direction, keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to shoot. And the third one I would hear was: always store your gun unloaded until you're ready to shoot. And so I'd hear those 3. Now, when you look at the 4, you're going to hear something different. The first 2 are going to be the same. Keep the gun pointed in a safe direction. Keep your finger off the trigger. All right. Those 2 you're going to hear the same. The third one, rather than saying always store your gun unloaded until you're ready to shoot, what you'll hear them say is always treat every firearm as if it were loaded. And sometimes, I think this is a good thing to say, even after, and no, this is really important, okay, they will say always treat every gun as if it was loaded, even after you've verified that it's unloaded. And then the 4th rule is know your target and what's beyond it, and have situational awareness. And so that can appear contradictory, and in a sense it has to be. So one side is saying always store your gun unloaded until you're ready to shoot. The other side says always treat every gun as if it were loaded. And the reason that exists is because of the necessity of concealed carry, and certain guns, live loaded because they are self-defense items. These guns, 99.9% of the time, are loaded. The only time they're unloaded is in between reloads during practicing and for cleaning and maintenance. Otherwise, they're loaded 24/7, 365. And so the rule of always store your gun unloaded till you're ready to use it doesn't apply to self-defense, because you never know when you're going to be thrust into a self-defense situation. And the last thing you want to be doing in a self-defense situation is trying to jam bullets in a magazine, put the magazine and rack it. That's not very realistic, and is probably, going to not end well for the person who came to the gunfight with an empty gun. So that's why rules like that exist. And it seems contradictory. And another contradiction that might appear, that I saw people address, at least, was the always point a gun in a safe direction, but that doesn't qualify when the gun's in a holster. Because if you're a guy, this is going to get a bit graphic, but if you're a guy and you ever appendix carry, you're pointing the barrel of the gun directly at your dick. And yes, people have been shot in the penis. People have been shot in the femoral artery and bled to death because of appendix carry. And it happens, And it's not because of appendix carry. It's because of compounding factors such as a bad holster design or training their draw with a loaded gun. And so if you're practicing drawing your gun, you should 100% not be doing that with a loaded gun. If you're practicing in your house, not at a range, not at a hot range, and you absolutely should 10 times more practice it with an unloaded gun, drawing, holstering, unholstering, dry firing. You want to build that muscle memory super deep into your subconscious mind, how you take that gun in and out of the holster, regardless of whether you're appendix carrying or not. You want to be able to confidently and reliably every single time draw the gun, present it without touching the finger, without any unnecessarily flagging of yourself or others, outside of what's absolutely demanded of cases like appendix carry or some shoulder holsters, where it's impossible to not flag yourself and other people with those holster configurations. And that's just the nature of it. There's no way to perfectly carry a gun in every situation where you're not going to technically point the gun in an unsafe direction, but it's in a holster. A gun in a holster is safe if the holster is well engineered. The danger is involved with someone who hasn't trained in the operation of that holster. And that's when accidents happen. Or if the person is training with a loaded gun. And yes, there are times after you've built that fundamental muscle memory, when you do need to go to the range, you do need to practice with a loaded gun in your holster. You need to be able to go to the range, draw, fire, return to holster. You don't want the first time that you've ever drawn a loaded gun to be in that self-defense situation. You need to actually be confident and comfortable doing that with a loaded gun. And this kind of goes into the dynamic of life, where a small amount of risk is inevitable, and we manage risk through repetitive training, foundational stuff, and compounding safety. That's why it's always these two rules: point the gun in the safe direction and keep your finger off the trigger. So even in the situations like appendix carry, where one of those rules might be momentarily violated, where you're pointing the gun at yourself, the reason why that still works is because it's a compounding rule. Your finger is still off the trigger, so you don't shoot yourself in the leg. Okay? Or if that's why the first rule is there. So you're always pointing the gun in a safe direction. So if you slip up and put your finger on the trigger, Well, the gun was pointed in a safe direction, right? So the rules work together. Okay. And the last thing I'm going to talk about, once again, I said I might come up with some stuff at the very end, and I remembered something I wanted to mention, is it's a respect thing. Like, violating gun safety is disrespectful. It's disrespectful to yourself, and it's disrespectful to the people around you. Having this attitude of, oh, well, I had the safety on. It's okay that I muzzle sweeped you. No, that's wrong. Or oh, I'm nervous. I'm new. Sorry. I finished shooting at the range and I turned around 360 degrees, flagging every single person in the whole room. How do I take the magazine out? No. You have to have a certain level of ataraxia. You have to be able to maintain your peace of mind, your situational awareness, and your priorities. Gun safety needs to be priority number one, not chasing after the thing you dropped on the ground, not asking for help. Gun safety is the first priority. Then communication, then cleaning, then whatever your social obligations are. Because gun safety is your first social obligation. None of that other stuff matters if you fuck up the gun safety. It's a matter of respect. That's why people get emotional and bothered, and why they have such a hard time communicating effectively about gun safety. And people's egos get involved too. You don't want to be that asshole who's fucking up gun safety. You don't want to be a disrespectful person. But we're not perfect. We make mistakes. And so it's humbling. It's humbling to admit that, after all of your military training and all of your decades of shooting, you just fucking flagged somebody. You just negligently discharged your pistol into the table at the back of the range where you weren't even supposed to have a loaded gun. Oops. Yeah, we make mistakes. It's tough. Thank God that it was just an embarrassing situation and that nobody got hurt or died every time, And so it's respect. It's self-respect and respect for other people. That's why we practice gun safety, and you do it on principle. Like, to me, I know a lot about guns, and so, like, to me, even the gun barrel itself should not be pointed at another person. It doesn't matter that you've completely disassembled the slide and you're just holding the barrel in your hand. Don't fucking point the barrel at another person. Out of respect. It doesn't matter that it's obviously safe, It doesn't matter that it's a toy gun. An airsoft gun, which countless people, how many people have been injured, shot, and killed by toy guns, by unloaded guns, by safe guns. Unsafe guns don't hurt people. The safe guns are the ones that cause accidents. So anyway, how I'm going to just hit you one more time. How many people have been shot by a gun when the safety was on? Anyway, guns are a very fun, entertaining, pleasurable, and useful thing in this world when they are used appropriately and safely. And, honestly, like, I hope that if you have been dissuaded from owning and shooting firearms by this video, maybe that's for the better. Like, I'm not going to judge anyone who says, not for me. Okay, that is, you have to make that decision. I'm not going to judge anyone who says, I love guns, I'm dedicating my life to guns. I've been there. I've been that person. You're literally experiencing the residual leftovers of decades of time spent in the gun industry, studying firearms, operating firearms. My perspective on guns has changed, but the foundations remain. And I continue to reinforce those foundations because they matter. Continuing education regarding gun safety matters because the technology changes. And sometimes for the better, sometimes not for the better. Like I'm going to cover some other stuff, things like hang fires, which in all those videos, I did not see a single person talk about hang fire. Not only that, I saw a video where they said, if your gun misfires, point it in a safe direction and try to unload it or something, failing to mention the possibility of a hang fire. And if you've never heard of a hang fire, let me educate you. I'd be happy to tell you what is a hang fire. A hang fire is something that traditionally happens with overaged ammunition. And what happens is the chemistry breaks down. 25 years max, 10 years is really a responsible age. You shouldn't, if you are playing with bullets, loaded rounds that are over 10 years old, you probably shouldn't use those for self-defense. If you're playing with loaded rounds that are over 25 years old, you can reasonably expect for the possibility of hang fires. However, take this into account. You could pick up a, original first generation rimfire 22 short, chamber it, and guess what? It's probably gonna fire. So don't count on it expiring, okay? It's probably going to work, but it might not. And so what the hang fire is it's kind of obvious in the name. It's a delayed fire. So the firing pin strikes the primer and it doesn't immediately ignite, but it slowly ignites. This can happen even 3, 5, maybe even 10 seconds. I mean, I don't really know the full possibilities of hang fires. But the fact of the matter is, especially in context, but just as a practice, if you pull the trigger and you hear a click, 1, point the gun in a safe direction. Do not stop pointing the gun in a safe direction. 2, do not attempt to unload the gun or clear the jam. Wait a reasonable amount of time, 5 or 10 seconds. It's not going to kill you before you attempt to unload the gun. Because what can happen in a hang fire situation is if it really is a hang fire and you start to unload that gun and then you've partially or significantly extracted the brass casing from the chamber so it's no longer supported, and then it detonates, what's going to happen is little pieces of brass shrapnel are going to fly out of the ejection port who knows where. And I have on multiple occasions had little pieces of brass get embedded into my hands in my lifetime of gun experience. So it's just something that you want to be informed about, you want to be prepared about. And thankfully for me, once again, even a 22 LR can cause extreme damage and can kill you. But thankfully for me, they were just 22 casings and I was able to get the brass parts out of my hand. And there was no permanent serious injury, just, no big deal. Thankfully, but it's something to consider, and why you want to be shooting, newly manufactured guns with newly manufactured ammunition to reduce the possibilities of these accidents from happening. And that's why, once again, it's about context and nuance and stuff. Most new gun users, the concept of a hang fire is not going to apply to them. But for advanced gun users or people who are interested in collectibles and antiques, then you seriously need to know about that stuff. Um, I just want to cover squibs real quick. Squibs and bore obstructions are dangerous because they can result in your gun blowing up. So always make sure that the bore of the gun, the barrel, is clear of any obstructions before loading and firing the gun. And do not look down the muzzle end of the gun to verify that it's clear. You know, you look from the chamber out the muzzle, or don't use your eyes. Drop a physical item. Usually I use a sub-caliber bullet. Like I'll drop a 22 bullet down a 9mm barrel and it's going to fall out the end, and then I know nothing's jammed in the barrel. And that doesn't always work because there could be, if the gun has been stored, maybe there's like some spider webs and stuff. So ultimately, if you can, you want to visually inspect, but for a quick check, if you're aware that the gun hasn't been excessively stored, where there's going to be buildup on the barrel, buildup of dirt, dust, bugs, stuff like that. I heard this story. I'm going to repeat it because it's memorable. That there was this guy. He was a shooter, but he didn't go out too much, and so he had his shotgun just kind of sitting in the corner of his safe or whatever. And his wife, she thought, oh, it'd be so nice to get my husband a new shotgun. And so she started saving up money to buy him a new shotgun. And so she was just jamming dollar bills, currency, into the barrel of the shotgun. And this had been going on for quite some time. So there was a lot of money in the barrel of this shotgun. And dude goes out to the range one day after a long, long, long time of not going to the range. He takes his shotgun, loads it up, pulls the trigger, poof, shredded green paper everywhere, and the gun barrel blows up. He's fine. He doesn't get injured, but he's out a gun and a lot of money. And honestly, he's lucky for that. He's lucky he didn't get a piece of metal embedded in his face. So yeah, just a little way to remind you to check for bore obstructions. So I think I've covered some stuff. I guess the point that really got me into this was the evolving nature of gun education, and that why it's important to continually expose yourself to gun safety education, because there's things you might not have heard about, that as people learn, nobody ever taught me, that a gun could be vibrated off of a desk by loud music and then discharged when you're not in the room. Nobody ever taught me that, because that's an extremely particular situation. But I can't say that nobody ever said, don't drop a gun. Don't put a gun in a situation where it could easily be dropped. Because certainly that is a foundation of gun safety, is not dropping the gun and not putting it in a situation where it can likely be dropped or knocked over. So that was definitely an oversight on my part. I can't claim absolute innocence in as far as even that situation, as strange and unlikely as it was in fact an oversight on my part. And so I can own up to that and, do my best to, like I said at the beginning, share my experience in the hope that, other people can get some positive takeaways from it. Anyway, stay safe out there. Actually, having fun is important to gun safety. So here's a new rule that I've never even thought of. Never, ever, never go shooting to the range out of obligation or social pressure because you want to fit in, or because maybe your family or friends are pushing you to go shooting. If you don't want to go shooting, don't go shooting. Stand your ground, maintain your boundaries. Don't let people pressure you into doing something that you genuinely don't want to do. Okay? There's no shame in saying, I'm tired. I don't feel like going shooting today. You know, sure, people are people. They might playfully roast you. Oh gosh, I haven't seen you in a while. You know, whatever. You know, that's the reality, is that, you know, we have to be independent. We have to, you know, be responsible. Yeah, you're probably going to be safe. You're probably going to be fine. It's not going to hurt you to go shooting out of a sense of obligation, but I don't consider that a healthy activity. I think that the safest and most effective times, you know, the only times that you should be going to the range is when you want to go to the range, when you're going to have fun at the range, when it's going to be a happy, enjoyable experience for you. That's super important, because if you're miserable, if you're just doing it to tag along, you know, then you're not going to be present. You're going to be thinking the whole time at the range, oh gosh, you know, this hearing protection's really digging into the side of my head, you know, gosh, I just keep feeling the pressure wave of all these gunshots and it's hurting my stomach, you know, oh gosh, my shoulder hurts, I'm holding up this pistol so long. Like, it's not going to be fun. You're not going to be present. And when you're not present, when you're thinking all I want to do is go home, oh this hurts, what you're not thinking about is pointing that gun in a safe direction. You're not thinking about keeping your finger off the trigger until you're ready to shoot. And that should always be your number one focus when you are in a firearms handling situation. It's pointing that gun in a safe direction, keeping your trigger finger, keeping your trigger discipline, you know, keep your booger hook off the bang switch. Anyway, I think with that, I'm gonna go ahead and close off this video. We're just short of an hour. It's every day, bro. It's every day, bro. Love and peace. You know what to do. I hate to do this, but I just realized that I forgot to cover squibs. So I'm gonna just do that really fast. I have to throw this in at the end of the video because I said something about squibs and then I only talked about bore obstructions and not squibs. A squib round usually happens with reloaded ammunition, but not always. Newly manufactured rounds can squib. Any round can possibly squib fire. And what is a squib fire? A squib fire is when there's enough powder to fire the bullet, but it stops halfway in the middle of the barrel. And the reason this is dangerous is because it happens in the middle of shooting, and it can even possibly eject the casing, or especially in the case of a revolver, you're going to be able to fire again. And what is the sign of a squib is it's going to be a note. I've had squib fires, by the way, but what you'll feel is the sound is going to be quieter, and the recoil is going to feel soft and not the way normally it does. You're going to have less recoil and less noise. And so if you ever notice that in firing, if you ever see those signs of less noise and less recoil, do not attempt to fire the gun again. Treat it like a hang fire. Give it 10 seconds and then unload the gun and check the bore for possible obstructions. I've had squib fires where the bullet did exit the barrel just at a lower velocity, and I've had squib fires where the bullet stops halfway through the barrel. And if you shoot again instead of unloading the gun, you risk blowing up the gun, which is obviously dangerous. That's all I wanted to say. I just wanted to explain what squib fires are, how to deal if one happens to you. That's all. Thanks again for watching. This is now an hour-long video about gun safety, and that's okay. Like, I'm going to encourage you to watch this video twice. I'm going to encourage you to pause and take notes. And I'm going to encourage you, if you have any questions, you can contact me, or for faster responses, use the internet to search your questions and to research and learn. And that's, if I could impress any one thing at the end of this video, is that gun safety is always a continuing educational process. And yeah, thank you for watching.